Hey, good morning, New Life Bremerton. How are you? It's good to be with you. I have a question. Ken mentioned earlier, we're all hearing this forecast. There may be snow. He kind of gave you his take. So here's my take that I told him earlier. I just need to see if I have friends here today where he's like, I'm not so sure. I'm like, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Yeah, bring it. Snow day vacation. All right. I'm glad I got friends here. Now we can move on. Hey, it is good to spend time with you today. And as Ken mentioned, we are in this series, How to Be Here, how to actually be fully present in our lives with each other, with God, in the midst of a time and a place where we all know there are a variety of things working to distract us. We feel it, we carry it, we sometimes feel immersed in it. And so we're starting off this new year with some really on-the-ground stuff of how do we follow Jesus into the good life, the life that he's made us for. And so we began last week, and this is really a beautiful summary of kind of what we're looking at, where Jesus' own words come to us in invitational form. And we looked at this where he says in John chapter 15:5, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those who remain in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. So there's this deep invitation that Ken led us into last week, where Jesus is saying, hey, the life I have with the Father and the Spirit, so God is one, but throughout the history of God's people, there's been this understanding that God exists as a relationship, Father, Son, Spirit, the Trinity. And that life that Jesus has with the Father and the Spirit, that's the life we get to get in on. We get to abide there. We get to rest there. We get to belong there. And Jesus is inviting us into it. And when we do, he says, you won't even have to think about what your life's producing. It will bear good fruit. It will bear love. It will bear peace. It will bear restoration. You will be participating with Jesus in his mission to help heal the world. It's just going to come out of it. And so this season, as we're kind of listening to that and leaning into that, we want to give some really practical tools of how to abide, how did Jesus do it, and how do we do it. And so today we're going to jump into that. And as we do, I want to ask you this question. I was thinking about conversations that I have with my friends and my family members, and even how I often have responded to kind of the entry point of a conversation. The question goes something like, hey, how you doing? How's it been going? And often the response I hear, tell me if you're with me on this, is, oh, I've been pretty good, but man, I've been busy. How many of you, that's like the common thing we hear? Or maybe we even say, and sometimes I think we say it as a bit of a, one of those words we just put out there for not thinking. But I think other times we say it because it is exactly where we're at. And I was thinking about that kind of response, that life is busy. And I was considering that and wondering, I wonder if that's really what we mean when we say that. And it made me to think about busy and hurry. So busy, I actually think a good life will require some investment of time, right? I was thinking about this in a variety of ways. Like many of us in here, we've been giving ourselves to work, to developing a career, or putting in the hours to kind of do what we think God has enabled us to do in the world. And it takes time. There's a busyness that comes with that actually is pretty good. It probably beats sitting in someone's basement just playing video games, right? Leaning into that kind of busyness. There's the busyness that comes that's really good of investing in relationships. I think you probably are with me. Relationships don't just happen. We have to invest in them. I'm fortunate enough, I have this wife, Hannah, who's walked with me for all these years and our 4 kids. And for me to know them and them to know me, I invest time. And honestly, there are some weeks, I spend a lot of time in that, maybe more than other weeks. And in a way, there's a healthy busyness to that. Even the stuff that we have to take care of. I think many of us in this room would say, man, we have been fortunate. We've been blessed to have a house to live in, to have a car to drive, to have things that we use in our daily life. And those things take time. Matter of fact, I will confess sometimes I look at those things and how much time it takes to maintain. And then I flash back to when I went to college and all I had was a duffel bag. And I'm like, I wonder if we can go back there. And then Hannah looks at me like, are you crazy? Let's do this thing. But it is one of those moments where Wendell Berry says, sometimes you wonder, do I own too much? He says, don't own so much clutter that you'll be relieved to see your house catch fire. Because sometimes this stuff takes a lot of time to take care of. My point is, life involves time. It involves a portion of busyness that's really healthy. I would say even people throughout the centuries have believed a well-lived life is one where we are reflective and introspective and we're aware of actually who we're becoming, and that even in itself takes time. Why I say all this is because I think sometimes that quick response, busy, I actually think sometimes we mean something else other than busy, because busy can be healthy. I think what we often mean is, I have just felt like I've been in such a hurry. Like internally, I feel like I'm always in a hurry. There's always something swirling, and in my life around me, it just seems like it's constant motion. I was rereading a book that I think is pretty great called Atomic Habits, and in it, the author, James Clear, says that so much of our lives are kind of influenced by the practice of just being in motion and not actual action. And he talks about the difference of the two. And I think that's often what we're getting at when we say, I'm busy. I think we're actually probably saying, I feel like I'm in a hurry. And I want to make this clear, like, I don't think that's something we should feel necessarily guilty about, because if you're here and I'm looking around and you've grown up in the U.S., I would say 1950s onward, you've actually been immersed in the way of hurry your entire life. There was a cardiologist who was noticing patients having a lot of trouble with their health in his particular discipline. And as he looked at the various factors that led to it, he coined this term or this phrase, hurry sickness. And hurry sickness, many people have described it as something like this behavior pattern that's characterized by continual rushing and anxiousness, an overwhelming and continual sense of urgency. It's like when a person feels chronically short of time and so tends to perform every task faster and even gets flustered when encountering any kind of delay. You ever felt like that? I was thinking about my own life. I often will read things and then I do these little self-tests. I don't know what that says about me, but I often do that. And I was thinking about that idea of hurry sickness and that last part of getting flustered when encountering any kind of delay. And I started thinking about just normal stuff in life, and I was like, oh. For instance, when I go to the grocery store, it's very common for me to look for the shortest lane to walk through. But if I'm really honest with you, I'm not usually just looking for the shortest lane. I want to hit up the self-checkout because I am convinced I am the fastest bagger in the place. Anybody with me? And if I'm really honest with you, I have this little nervous internal twitch that starts if I'm there waiting for the self-checkout and I have to stand there longer than 30 seconds. I'm like, it's called self-checkout, not self-wait to check out. Like, I'm ready to go. I was thinking about this in other parts of life. Maybe you're like me, driving. And I don't know really why, but my kids and even some of my friends, when we road trip together, they ask other people to drive because they think I'm like in too much of a hurry sometimes. So like one of the way it works out is you're approaching a stoplight. This will be a fun test. What do? You have multiple lanes to choose from. Well, obviously you go into the lane that has the least amount of cars. Who's with me? But what you really do is you look for that intersection where on the other side of it, the lanes are gonna merge into one. And where do? You go into that lane on the far right where you can merge in faster than everyone else, right? Or am I just sick? I don't know. Oh, I was even thinking about with coffee. Okay, if you know me, I actually love really good coffee, and I actually think it's supposed to taste good. It's not just dark liquid in a cup to like stimulate us for the day. And so I've learned the art of pour over coffee, and I'd happily make a cup for you, and we could hang out and chat and all that kind of stuff. But there's something weird that happens because at home, I love making pour over because I like the outcome, but I actually like the process. I actually like that it takes me a little bit. It helps me start my day. Usually I'm up before anyone else, and I'm making coffee, and life is good. But something weird happens when I go to a coffee shop that serves good pour over. Somehow, I think they're supposed to deliver all of that goodness that it takes time to create in a matter of seconds. And if not, again, I get really fidgety. And I'm thinking about all this. I'm like, oh, I am sick. And then I was even thinking about like my relationship with my kids. I love them. They are such like a dear part of my life, but I couldn't help but think of the various times I get so in a hurry with them. Like, I want them to act like someone they're not, whether it be their age or just who they are. And I was like, wow, I do think I've probably grown up immersed in this time and place of hurry sickness, and I think you probably have too. It's just where we come from. And what's interesting is that underlying culture is making us really tired. There was a study by the National Safety Council that said 97% of Americans have at least one of the leading risk factors for fatigue. So like that means all of us practically. And it goes on a little further and it said that of the respondents, 43% of them said they don't get enough sleep to think clearly at work, make informed decisions, and be productive. So there's hurry sickness, and it is just killing us and making us tired. And I was thinking about that a little bit, and I wondered, what about those of us who say, like, I have faith, or I'm living in the way of Jesus, and we have belief and those kinds of things? Is it any different? And in just a moment, we're going to actually look at Jesus' life and what he has to say about it, because there is such good news in the midst of this. But what I discovered before I want to go there is this guy named Michael Zigarelli did this study looking at people's obstacles to growing in their faith. And just espousing belief or having faith actually didn't change this very much, people's experience of hurry sickness and fatigue. He actually did this study over 20,000 people ages 15 to 88 over the course of like 139 countries. So this expansive study. And what he found was that even people of faith, that the norm is that we assimilate into the culture of busyness, hurry, and overload that we've just grown up in. And that what happens when that takes place is that God, a relationship with God, often gets marginalized, pushed to the edges because we don't think we have enough time. And there are all these competing voices telling us how to live and who we're supposed to become and the expectations we need to live into. And it's just daunting. And there's no time to actually flourish in a long and slow and developing relationship with God. So it becomes marginalized. Well, out of that, then our felt experience is often that there's this deteriorating relationship with God. He's distant, he's disconnected. I'm not sure what's going on with that. And that then because of that Jesus followers can become even more vulnerable to adopting cultural norms of busyness and hurry and fatigue. And I know that can sound like really bad news, but I'm not bringing it as that. It's just a moment to tell the truth of what we've been immersed in and probably what we all could tell stories about right now. It's the kind of stuff that writers and poets have been talking about forever. T.S. Eliot said, "Where is the life we have lost in the living?" And even this person who's been a real mentor to me through his writing, his name is Dallas Willard's done a lot of writing on the Jesus way and how do we follow Jesus and be disciples of his right here, right now on the ground. He even addressed this and said, we need to tell the truth because hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. So you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. But again, how are we going to do that? Here is the good news. Jesus offers an invitation to us who've grown up in hurry, who are immersed in it, who feel tired and weighed down. And here's what he says in Matthew 11. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. He's saying there is another way. You do not have to stay in the midst of that loop that makes us tired and makes us frazzled and not connected to each other, to God. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. And I think it's important to hear this. Let me teach you. Take my way and ingest it. Follow me. Learn from me. Watch how I do it. Keep company with me, and you're going to learn a new way, a way that's light and free. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. Today, Jesus is here, the living Lord, saying that to all of us. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you frazzled? Are you always in a hurry? Are you just drained? Come to me, and I'm actually going to show you how to live. I'm going to help you recover your life because you were not made to just bear the brunt of hurry culture. You were made as the beloved sons and daughters of God. That is who you are. And so as we think of that, remember, Jesus says, not just come, but actually let me teach you, like apprentice with me. Like, let me actually show you how to live. And I think it's important that we hear Jesus on that. By all means, Jesus is the full embodiment of God. God puts on humanity and comes among us to reconcile us to God the Father and take care of our future. But I think we'd be missing out if we didn't know that he also came to us to show us how to live the full human life right here, right now. That is part of the wonder of God becoming human. He was fully God, but also fully human. Yeah. And so it's interesting if you look at his life, if we want him to teach us. There's this little summary statement in Luke's Gospels, and the Gospels are these like 4 portraits or stories of who Jesus is, what he said, what he did, that we can kind of immerse ourselves into at the beginning of the New Testament of the Bible. And Luke is one of those Gospels. And in it, Luke describes Jesus' life like this, Luke 5. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. And I want to circle on that word, withdrew. Jesus often hit the pause button, took a break, returned to normalcy when it came to pace. Even when his to-do list was full. Hear that. If you were to read through Jesus' life, he had a few things that were going on. He had some stuff that people were expecting of him. He actually came to make the world right. So I'd say he had a to-do list. You in? Yeah. What's interesting is, though, he would hit the pause button and take a break even when the to-do list was not completely checked off. And I bet a lot of us have to-do lists. The one we make, the one the people we live with make for us. Did you know you're made to follow Jesus, to learn how to live life like he did, that you actually get a break even when you haven't accomplished everything? That is the way to be fully human. That is the way to live in the way of Jesus. It's interesting, too, he would withdraw even when others still had expectations of him. And they could be heavy expectations, but somehow he wasn't run by those. And we'll look in a moment at what he was run by, and it was this deep, abiding relationship with a father who called him beloved son. Did you know that you and I get that too? I'm sure you're here today, and there are expectations, again, that maybe you've put on yourself or that others have put on you. But those things do not get to run your life. You are liberated and free, children of God who get to take a break and not live in the swirl of hurry culture. And we follow Jesus into this life. And what's interesting is if you pay attention to his life, the life where there are these regular pauses, this way of eliminating hurry that he leads us into, I think you'll see the relationship between those pauses that root him back in his identity, that remind him who he really is, where he gets to actually take a break and rest, and then his ability to be fully present in his mission. There's a relationship between the two. Now, I think some of us would be tempted to say, well, he's fully present in his mission because he's God, and he is. But I think, again, we would miss something if we pushed away the fact he was also fully human. And just like we're fully human, there is a relationship between resting and pausing and actually being the people we long to be, the people we're made to be, the people who are sent on mission with God to help heal the world. So let me give you a couple of examples. That's what he often did, but let's look at it like practically, some real kind of scenarios that he shows us. So Mark's gospel, I want to give you a few scenes from there, and I would just say this. If you're kind of discovering who Jesus is, or you're curious how you could get into like knowing more about him, I love to actually recommend Mark's gospel, and here's why. It's one of those stories of Jesus we talked about a moment ago, but it's this one built with these short burst scenes. It reminds me like of a series of short films, right? They're quick, they're raw, there's great cinematography, you get to the point. And in Mark's gospel, we see a couple of these expressions of Jesus withdrawing. There's one in Mark chapter 1, verse 35, where it says, before daybreak the next morning, and just hold that, the next morning, so it's referencing something else. But before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. So if you were to read through Mark's gospel, the next morning is coming after this really big season of Jesus healing people and liberating people and showing that the kingdom of God had come, that God was making the world right. Jesus was all up in that business of making the world right, and he was tired, and he needed a break, and so he withdrew to an isolated place to pray. And I think as we hear that word pray, I don't know what your experience has been with that, but maybe we hear that word and we think, oh, he just went and talked nonstop to God. Well, actually, prayer for Jesus and his contemporaries, the life he would have grown up in, prayer wouldn't have just been about talking. It would have been communing with God. It would have been being quiet. It would have been resting. It would be actually believing that the Father loved him and he could pause in that. And by all means, he would also commune and talk and converse with God. But it was relaxed, just like we do with a good friend, a friend that knows us deeply, that we don't have to like jump through hoops with. That's what he would do. You move through the gospel a little more in Mark chapter 3, And we pick up in verse 13 that afterward, so again, a key word, something's been going on. Afterward, Jesus went up on a mountain and called out the ones he wanted to go with him. And they came to him. Then he appointed 12 of them and called them his apostles. So that word just means the people he was going to send out, his representatives, those who were going to join him in helping to heal the world, to make things right, to pronounce that God has come, he loves us, wants to be in relationship with us, and that's what we're made for. The afterward, though, again, points to a period, if you read Mark's gospel, Jesus had been busy doing the stuff of his mission, showing and telling the kingdom, healing, delivering, making things right. And so he hits the pause button and gets away to commune with God like we've been talking about. But this one seems to also give us some cool perspective in that not only did he take time to rest, but he also took time to contemplate what his next move was going to be. It's like out of this communing and restful relationship with God, he's actually able to have the wisdom he needs to choose those apostles. Even the earlier reference in Mark 1, after his rest, he comes back and gives direction. There seems to be a correlation in Jesus' life between his hitting the pause button, his eliminating hurry, his withdrawing, and his ability to live life really well, really full, really on mission. And then Mark 6, another example of this that gives us a helpful nuance as well. So those apostles, those representatives that Jesus was going to send out, he actually did that not too long after he chose them. And that is such good news. We get in this life with Jesus, and he doesn't wait around before he says we get to join him and actually being good news in the world. I love that. And that was the same with his friends. And they had returned to Jesus from their ministry tour, and they told him all they had done and taught. And Jesus said to them in Mark 6, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. So not only did Jesus do this himself, but he wanted to invite his friends, you and I, into a life where this is the norm. Let's hit the pause button. Let's connect. Let's replenish. Let's return to who we truly are. But this one adds a special kind of helpful nuance to consider as we're talking about Jesus' way of eliminating hurry, and it's this. So come rest, he says. So they hop in a boat, and they're going to cross a lake and take some time for a retreat. It's been heavy. They've been healing a lot of people. Jesus' cousin has died. A lot's been going on. But a crowd of people, Jesus has become pretty well known by then because when you start healing people and taking care of people, they kind of notice who you are and they want to be with you. And they saw him heading out, and so they ran around the lake and were waiting for them when they got to the other side. Now, here's why I think that's interesting. The crowds interrupted Jesus' original plan that he and his friends would get some rest. But because he was able to live into a life of this wasn't a one-shot wonder. Because he had a pattern of withdrawing, a pattern of resting, a pattern of, finding that center with God, he was actually able to put his plans on hold for a minute. He had compassion on them, and this is the story where just a little later we see he feeds 5,000 people. And as we think of our own lives, about making decisions and living into the mission, about being a people who return to our identity, about being a people maybe who have a rhythm where even when others interrupt it for the sake of what God wants to do in the world, what would it look like if instead of being hurried all the time, we followed Jesus' lead and we discovered this whole new life? That's what we're made for. That's what Jesus is inviting as he says, come to me, all of you that hurry has just been piling up on you. And so I want to give a few things that we can do if we want to follow Jesus into the unhurried life. And they're built on his example. And the first one is to pause. I've mentioned that word several times and shown how he did that. But you and I get to pause as well. We get to rest. So how many of you totally enjoyed what the team was doing up here earlier with music? They are so amazing. Their talent, their skill, they lead us into worship. But let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to consider if their music contained no rests, we would not be able to participate in it? It would just be one endless sound. It would actually hurt our ears. It would not be inviting. It can't work that way. Did you know music does not work unless there are rests? And life doesn't work unless there are rests. We are not made to just be hurried and overwhelmed with haste. We are the beloved children of God. And that's one of the things that happens when we hit the pause button. Because I know in a crowd like this, there'll be some of us but I got too much to do. I don't know. People have always told me my worth comes from what I produce. Well, there is another voice here today saying you have worth that is far beyond that because you are a beloved daughter, you are a beloved son. I don't know if you know this story, but in Matthew chapter 3, Jesus is baptized, and when he comes up out of the water, listen to what happens. After his baptism, as he came up, the heavens were open, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and settling on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my dearly loved son who brings me great joy." So in that moment, we see that communing relationship Jesus had. But what does the Father say to him? Get busy, do more stuff. Have you got that stuff to me yet? No, this is my beloved son who brings me great joy. And I don't know your history with stuff and people talking about God, but I remember growing up in a context where a lot of people talked about how God had come to put my life back together in heaven one day. But if I'm honest with you, the way they painted the picture, it didn't sound like God liked me very much. But do you know what Jesus shows us? God delights in us. We bring him joy. Because when Jesus says, follow me, which is what he says over and over again, he's saying, follow me into the beloved life. So today, you are not somebody who's just made to do more, produce more, make more. You are the beloved children of God, and you get a break. The world does not have to be on your shoulders. You get to pause. So on the back of the note sheet, for a couple of the things we're going to talk about as we wrap up, we've tried to give some practical handles. So sometimes it's really helpful to put pause into our schedule. Actually, a little later this year, you're going to hear some invitation to even go away for a few days as we hit the pause button and we take some time for what Jesus followers have called this practice, which is solitude. But what about in the moment when I just dropped the kids off and I got like 10 minutes to get to work and everything's like feeling crazy and life feels in a hurry? There's actually good news. We can build these little micro moments of pause into our day as well. And on the back of the program, we actually gave you a little pause prayer built on that invitation of Jesus in Matthew 11, come to me. And maybe that's to get you started if you don't know how you would do it. It's like a centering prayer that returns you into the life that Jesus had with the Father and that you get. There's another practice I would add to that of how to build these little micro pause moments. So sometimes when my day feels nutty, sometimes even before the day gets started, when I need to return, when I need to pause, when I need to follow Jesus' example of withdrawing, but again, this would be one of those smaller moments, not one of the planned out moments. There's this way of praying through Psalm 46:10, which some of you may have heard. Be still and know that I am God. That's been really helpful for me. And it's basically praying that psalm or that little line from the psalm in 5 phrases, just being slow about it. And it goes like this. Be still and know that I am God. And I take a breath and I remember I get to be still with the God who loves me. Be still and know that I am. And I take a breath and I remember the I am who has come to fulfill all things, that I don't have to hold them up. And I pause. Be still and know. Because, man, I need to be reminded and know in a lot of moments, again, that life isn't built to just be hurried through. And I pause. Be still. Such a good news invitation. And I pause. Be. We are human beings made in the image of a loving God who delights in us. Our doing can only come out of that. These little moments of pause help remind me of that, help return me to my identity, and they'll do the same for you. So if we want to follow Jesus into the unhurried life, let's build some pause, both the micro moments, and then I would encourage you, get together with the people you're connected to and talk about your schedule. How could you build some pause moments? And we'll do some stuff this year to help you with that, but let's pause. The second thing is to pay attention. I don't know about you, but sometimes I can get so absorbed in being in a hurry that I'm just not aware of what I just even did or what I'm supposed to do. And I can turn around and be like, where am I? Again, maybe that's just my oddity, an issue that I need counseling for, but maybe you know what I'm like. Maybe you know what's going on with that. But paying attention, Jesus did that. Built within those examples of pausing, he paid attention to when life had been full and heavy and he needed a break. He listened to what was going on in his body and his soul. And we are invited into the same place, the same way of living. There's a lady named Ruth Haley Barton that kind of shared these 10 signs of hurry sickness, which we talked about earlier, that might be a helpful place to consider where we are. I know they could seem negative, but maybe you just hold these up and you look at, oh, am I irritability? Oh, maybe I just need to pause for a minute. Maybe I'm struggling with actually being here and I'm isolating myself. Escapist behaviors, I was thinking about hurry sickness in that one, and I was like, oh, I even escape when I escape sometimes. I don't know if you're like me. Like I'm watching Netflix and I'm binging through Parks and Rec, and why can't I wait to hear the theme music at the beginning but have to skip the intro? Like I am completely like escaping what I'm escaping. Crazy. Again, more counseling, but you get the gist. I think this paying attention thing can be helpful for us. Jesus models it, and we're invited into it. And it might not be using a list like that. I think it could be, though, having a conversation with the folks you're connected to on a regular basis where we truly ask each other how we're doing and we tell the truth. I'm really distracted right now. I've been in a hurry, and I got this thing in my gut, and it feels like constant movement, and I don't fully know what it is, and I don't know what to do with it. And then we say as friends, oh, well, let's build some pause into your life. Let's help you return to your identity. Beloved son, beloved daughter. So we pause, we pay attention. And then lastly, maybe for many of us, it's time to practice a new rhythm. Jesus shows us this so beautifully. It's akin to his practice of pausing or solitude. See, he grew up with a people that story was so rooted in God, the God who loved, the God who delights. And I don't know if you know this, but the God who even made time to work a certain way, where we rest, where we live with rhythm. What that's usually called when this conversation comes up with Jesus and throughout the biblical story is a practice called Sabbath. And it's rooted in the very beginning of things. I don't know if you know the story of creation, but it talks about how God made everything we see and hear and touch and interact with. And after each day of creation, he pronounces the world good and then ultimately very good. And that's not just a phrase like, oh, those French fries are good, or I think your car's pretty good. It's more like this thing is fully functioning. It's working as it should. And at the end of that, we hear in Genesis chapter 2, so now you see how the Creator swept into being the spangled heavens, the earth, and their hosts in 6 days. On the seventh day, with the canvas of the cosmos completed, God paused from his labor and rested. Thus, God blessed day 7 and made it special, an open time for pause and restoration, a sacred zone of Sabbath keeping because God rested from all the work he had done in creation that day. Well, God didn't rest because he got tired. The way the scripture reads, God made a fully functioning world that he steps back from and he looks at, and he invites us to do the same and take a break and enjoy it and delight in it and delight in his love for us. Sabbath, a gift. If you read through the story of Scripture, you'll actually find Sabbath comes up a little later. This people that God had welcomed into the world, our ancient fathers and mothers, later they found themselves enslaved. And God comes and liberates and frees them, and he reminds them, because they've heard all kinds of other stories about who they were when they were in slavery, but he comes and reminds them, you are a free people, a liberated people, and you are not made to live under the thumb of hurry and just production. You are more than what you make. You are more than what other people say you should be doing. You get a break. You get rhythm. You get rest. You can trust that the God who made the world can uphold it. You do not have to live under the weight of holding up the world. And so you're invited into this thing called Sabbath. Interesting. By the time Jesus comes on the scene, there were people who had made Sabbath all about rules and regulations. They had made it heavy. And they step in to try to correct Jesus and his friends when they were enjoying the day, when they're eating and being together and saying, Jesus, you didn't do it right. And I love his response to them. He says, the Sabbath was made for the needs of human beings and not the other way around. God so loves us that he wants to give us rhythm and rest and delight and space. So just like earlier, I gave you a couple of examples of how you might build pause. Here's one I'd love it if you'd play with this week. A bit of an experiment, how we could apply the Sabbath reality to right here, right now. If you look back in Jesus' practice and his friends, Sabbath would have started on Friday evening at sundown and run till Saturday evening at sundown. And so if you look at a day, and a day had 3 blocks to represent a morning block, an afternoon block, and an evening block, you could have said that Sabbath went the evening block of Friday, the morning block of Saturday, and the afternoon block of Saturday. So 3 back-to-back-to-back blocks. So here's where we get to play and experiment and be the free children of God. This week, what 3 back-to-back-to-back blocks will you and the people you're connected to with chart out on your schedule where you can put down your work and you can simply delight in being the children of God and delight in his love and in the world he's made? And what it could look like is this. You get to make it up, but let me give you an example. I cease working. For me, a lot of my work is in my brain. I write code, I do some other stuff. Sometimes on Sabbath, I love to get my hands in the dirt or do something physical. I love to often cook on Sabbath as well and invite people over to eat with. I love playing with my kids. I love just taking a break and doing something enjoyment. Some days when I'm really tired, I'll take a nap, which is totally crazy. I'm not used to that, and I love it, though. I'm not going to lie. Nap. You can do it however you see fit, but you are invited with me, with all of us this week, to live into this life that Jesus gives us that is unhurried, where we get to pause, where we get to pay attention, and we get to practice a new rhythm. And don't be afraid to try it out. You're made for it. Don't be worried about if you get it all right or not. We'll figure it out together, but 3 back-to-back-to-back blocks of rest and delight. We're not made to live under the tyranny of hurry. We are not made to be crushed by the demands we put on ourselves or others put on us. We are more than what we produce. We are the beloved sons and daughters of God. May this week we find ourselves living into that as we follow Jesus into it. And so I'd like to ask you this. What have you heard, sensed that you're invited into right now? If you're here and maybe this idea of even who is Jesus or a life of faith in Jesus is new or something you've been even holding at a distance, here's what I hope. I hope you've discovered that Jesus longs to give you a life that is flourishing and good and abundant, that he is not here to use you up and discard you, that you are valuable, that he leads you into the belovedness that is yours and your Creator. And here's what I hope today you've heard, an invitation to say yes to Jesus, a yes to that life. If that's you, that Connect card Ken mentioned earlier, would you check that? We'd love to track with you and help you walk on mission with Jesus in that. Maybe you're here today and one of these practical things of pausing and taking that new rhythm to heart, paying attention, that's the one you're gonna lean into. Maybe write that on your Connect card or write a prayer of how you'd like some help with that, and we wanna walk with you. Whatever it is you've sensed the Spirit saying, the invitation, would you lean into that? We're gonna just create a couple of moments for that. Would you lean into that? After a couple of moments, buckets will pass. You can drop that Connect card in there, your giving envelope in there, and we'll worship together as we are sent out as the children of God, the free, liberated, unhurried children of God. So let's respond together.